almost as if your mind,
Fantastic.
almost as if your mind was like a leaf falling off a tree and fluttering gently down onto the surface of a pond. And then the leaf hits the water and it rides on the surface of the pond. And if there are little waves, then it just rides like this. So the waves of the breath the same way. The mind alights on the breath and just rides on the waves of the breath. And I can feel it with my eyes open, with my eyes closed. And I just sort of feel the breath moving in the body. I'm not pushing it, I'm not pulling it, I'm not trying to control the breath. I'm just surfing, if you will, on the waves of the breath. And I'm feeling the sensations in the body. I'm not thinking about my breathing, I'm feeling my breathing. I'm feeling it like an animal body, you know, that this is like a deep part of my nature, breathing. It happens whether I think about it or not. So I'm feeling the breath. And the breath comes in, and the breath goes out. And the breath comes in, and the breath goes out, and I feel it. And I can feel my whole body sitting here in an erect and dignified posture, breathing. The skin is breathing. So I can feel a sense of my body as a whole. Beautiful. It's already complete. Even if I have pain or there's something the matter, in this moment, it's all I have. It's my whole life. Can I be in touch with all of it? So I can do this for 5 seconds. If I'm in the middle of a busy meeting or something, I can do it for 5 minutes. Or I could do it for, say, 45 minutes. Or 20 minutes. Just that. Then, of course, the mind doesn't stay on the breath. It just won't stay on the breath. It goes here, it goes there, starts to think about the future.
Bring it back.
And you first watch where it goes. And you just note what's on your mind. You just note it. You pay attention. What's on your mind? That's as interesting as the breath. So it's not that the breath is like more interesting. So you watch, oh, what's on my mind? And then you thread the breath into that. So that you're not trying to push that away and come back to the breath. You're not trying to stay there and just think about that. But
you're not fighting with it.
You're not fighting with it in any way, but you're accepting it and then bringing the awareness of the breath into it. Then it usually just goes away like a cloud, and you have the breath again. And the next moment, the mind goes off someplace else. You have some memory, and you get angry because it wasn't a pleasant memory. And then you realize, oh, I'm not with my breath anymore. So you thread the breath into the feeling of anger, and you stay with the breath and the anger, and you notice the anger goes away. Why? Because everything's changing all the time. Nothing stays the same for long. So the breath oscillates. You ride with the breath. And you begin to develop a sense of what we call in English centeredness, groundedness, a sense of being without doing anything. I'm not doing anything. I'm just watching my life unfold. You may say, well, that's very passive. That's very passive. There's nothing passive about it. It's really attending to being. Now, most of the time we're running around doing. We're doing. And sometimes we forget who's doing all this doing and why. So we run around like crazy trying to get someplace else, and we forget or ignore we're already here. It may not ever be any better than this. If we forget this moment, what makes us think some other moment's going to be so great? We'll just forget that moment too, because it'll be the same mind. This way you begin to fashion a mind that's very bright, that's very open, that's very loving. This is, I think, an act of ultimate love. Enough that one loves oneself and one loves life enough to be present for it. Now, all the great artists understand that. Monet, for instance, when he would paint what he saw. But it's very difficult to paint what you see. And he saw shadow and color and form in remarkable ways and was able to paint something that when you look at it, it expands your mind. Poets do the same thing. They can take words and they can make the words come together in such a way that something deeper explodes inside you. Beautiful.
they are much more alert and attentive, no?
Exactly.
Observative.
Exactly.
They have
and so you
much
see...
more power to observe.
Yes, and so artists have this great power of observation and attention. Scientists, in a different way,
yes, they
great
have the
powers
same.
of observation and attention. Neither of them wants to be biased, because if you're biased, then it becomes uninteresting. You're preconceiving what things are, so you can't really see them, because you're only seeing your ideas. This gets in the way as a scientist, gets in the way as an artist. Then your art is mediocre. It doesn't speak, it doesn't live. So the discipline of the adventure of capturing our moments becomes, in a way, a very radical act of appreciation of life, of really embracing life. Then your relationships will be very different, because you're there for them. A lot of the time we're unconscious. We're running along on automatic pilot, so we're not really there. There's a wonderful poem by Antonio Machado that speaks to this. I will say it in English, because I can't say it in Spanish. But it goes like this. The wind one brilliant day called to my soul with an odor of jasmine. I'll say that again, because I lost it. The wind one brilliant day called to my soul with an odor of jasmine. In exchange for the odor of my jasmine, I would like all the odor of your roses. I have no roses. All the flowers in my garden are dead. Well then, I'll take the withered petals and the yellowed leaves and the waters of the fountain. And the wind laughed, and I wept. And I said to myself, what have you done with the garden that was entrusted to you? What have you done with the garden that was entrusted to you? Now, because we are primarily concerned about the present moment, I like to put it in the present moment as a question. What are we doing with the gardens that are entrusted to us? The wind can call to our soul. The wind is life itself. It's the breath. It's the sacred in every aspect of our lives. But if we're busy, if we're always running along on automatic pilot trying to get someplace else, we won't feel the wind. So he says, the wind one brilliant day. But that's if you're lucky. If you're lucky, one brilliant day, you'll feel the wind. If you're not lucky, you might die before you have the experience of the wind speaking to you. Not because it's not speaking to you all the time, but because we don't feel. We're not paying attention. We're ignoring the messages. So the challenge of meditation, the challenge of mindfulness, is to be awake in our lives, for our lives, while we have the opportunity.
It gives you a much brighter and bigger awareness, no?
Exactly.
You can perceive little things, small things, anything, noises.
Exactly. It gives you a much bigger awareness, and you also see openings where before you didn't see any openings. So you can navigate through life and make more effective choices. You can have many different ways to respond to situations, even stressful and unpleasant situations. You have a range of choices rather than only one automatic reaction all the time. So we distinguish between reacting to stress, which is very automatic and mechanical, and responding to stress where, it's like a dance. It's an art form. I can do this, I can do that. It's more like Monet, the way Monet. More choices. So Monet, he used to line up canvases, and he'd paint an hour on this canvas, then he'd move here and paint the same thing, but the light's different. So it's different. And then an hour later, he'd move here and paint the same thing, the light's different. And is able to show, and Monet was a genius at this, that we don't cultivate our own capacity for seeing. So very often we might say, look at a child, our own child, and not really see that child. We only see our idea of the child. So it's a very powerful meditation practice for parents to ask, who is this child? What does this child need from me right now? Can I even see what this child is going through, what he or she may need? And then relate from my heart in that way, rather than just,
It's interesting.
I know who you are.
Yes.
Because we don't know who our children are. And we don't very often know what we're feeling. But if we are aware that we don't know, we will be more gentle, we will be more respectful, and they will feel that, and they will be more empowered. We call that mindful parenting. It's just one application of the meditation practice. You don't even have to be a meditator. You don't have to be a meditator to do any of this stuff. And that's a very important point. We're not trying to turn the world into meditators. What we're trying to do is invite people to wake up to the beauty of their lives and to all of these hidden dimensions that have to do with really coming to our senses, becoming more sensible. And you do that by practicing, by cultivating the gardens. So the body's a garden, the mind is a garden, our children are gardens, our work is a garden, our relationships are gardens. If we have parents and they're still alive, these may be very difficult gardens to cultivate, but nevertheless they are gardens. And if we bring that kind of attention, of vitality of attention to our lives, it's as you're saying, they light up. They're more full. They're more whole. And then even if we have problems, being human, we're going to have problems. I call it the full catastrophe, you know. The human,
full catastrophe.
The full catastrophe. That was what Zorba the Greek called it. The full catastrophe. Life, he said, wife, house, kids, the full catastrophe. It's the human condition. So stress isn't bad. Pain isn't bad. It's partly what happens to us. Of course, nobody wants to be in pain. Nobody wants to be completely stressed out. But the message is, we can work with this moment exactly as it is.
You've worked, John, with a lot of people, no, with pain. And
yes, thousands.
Thousands.
And you see, I don't do anything with them. I don't fix them. I don't cure them. I don't heal them. They do this work themselves. But it's not trying to fix themselves. It's trying to become aware of how they are already whole. Then very often the pain changes. Sometimes it goes away, or sometimes you learn how to live with it better. All sorts of physiological things change, but the irony is they change when we stop trying to make them change. It's like when you try to go to sleep. The more you try to go to sleep, you have a big thing you have to do the next day. You're not going to get to sleep by forcing. So much of the time we want to force things to be the way that we want them to be. But anybody who sleeps, and we all know this because we all sleep, you have to let go. We don't know how we go to sleep.
We don't know.
No, but we don't do it by forcing. We do it by letting go.
And a lot of people have sleep disorders.
The first thing that happens to you when you're really under stress in your life is your sleep is disturbed.
Yes.
You have sleep disorders. Then maybe you get headaches. Then maybe you get neck tension, you know. Your shoulders come up here. Your face is contracted. And very often you begin to feel that your whole view of yourself is a little contracted or a little tense or a little diminished. And when you hug somebody, often they feel like a piece of wood. Well, you know, you can learn to not be a piece of wood in your life anymore. And that's what we do with people. They're very grateful, by the way, when the 8-week course is over, they come and they very often say to their instructor, oh, you helped me so tremendously. And we like to point out, well, we played our part, but it's more like a coach, you know, a sports coach like or something like that. Yes. We stand on the sidelines and we say, we encourage people, but they have to do the work themselves. It's an interior work, and it's also an exterior work. So we do the inner work of cultivation, and then we bring it into the world in ways that make our whole life more wakeful, more aware, more attentive, and less reactive, less judgmental. That, by the way, the being less judgmental doesn't mean that we get stupid or that we don't value one thing over another. So we make a distinction between being judging and being discerning. Judging is, I like this, I don't like that. Being discerning is, why I find this more attractive than that. But then we're not caught, we're not grasping, we're not clinging so much, then we're freer. So the meditation practice ultimately is about freedom. That's why meditation is always spoken of, whether it's yoga or the Tibetan Buddhism or anything, or Christian meditation. It's all about liberation. It's a liberative orientation. What are we being free from? The prison of our own diminished thinking, narrow thinking, self-concept that's inaccurate. It's just not true. So a lot of the time the thoughts in the mind are, you're too old, you're too fat, you're too this, you're too that, you're no good, you're too slow, you're too stupid.
And a lot of inner talking. You keep
tremendous.
All day, yes.
And it's a huge waste of energy. Yeah. And a lot of it is actually, frankly, abusive. I mean, we just like, instead of being appreciative of ourselves, we don't like ourselves.
No, and it must surely be like hypnotic too, no?
It is, right. As Thich Nhat Hanh, the great Vietnamese Zen master, likes to say, the reason we need to practice mindfulness is that we're practicing mindlessness all day long. Every time we get angry and we go like this, we get better at it, because practice makes perfect. So it does have that hypnotic quality to it, that we, the more we stay in the unconscious, the more we stay in the automatic, the more we stay in the unfeeling, the more we stay in just thinking, the better we get at that, and it is like a prison for us. And Albert Einstein actually observed that and spoke about how the mind can create a prison for us. And it's a delusion of consciousness, was the way he put it. It's a delusion of consciousness. But as long as we don't know that it's a delusion, we are in that prison. And this is about, and Einstein said, the goal is liberation from the prisons of our own creation.
Incredible. Yeah.
And that's what mindfulness is really about. Anybody can do this. We work with athletes. We work with
you trained or
the Chicago Bulls, the United States Olympic rowing team, many, many different collegiate rowing teams.
Do you work too, sorry, John, with visualization? Or
some,
not?
And
some.
I'll talk about that. We've done a study of healing in which we used visualization, very powerful. With the athletes, we don't use visualization so much. But we also work with businesses, we work with corporations, we work with presidents and CEOs. We run retreats in the desert for 5 days for presidents and CEOs. We work with...
Why do you take presidents and CEOs to the desert?
Oh, because... we want to profoundly change their environment. And the desert is such an extreme environment.
Isolated.
Yes, it's isolated, it's extreme, and you begin to see, like for the first time. There's big cactuses with arms like this, 500 years old. Totally you come in the presence of something like that, you go we go deep into the mountains. Of course, we also we live in a luxury resort for those 5 days. So it's a combination of austerity and opulence, but it's all oriented towards cultivating mindfulness. And we take them outside their usual, and no cell phones, no beepers, no laptops. So it's like a huge commitment to do this, but your whole life can open up in 5 days. And then if you're the president of a company, that might really influence the way the work happens in the company. So that's why we do that kind of thing. And then the money we charge for that pays for our inner city clinic, which is for poor people, which is for homeless people, which is for people who don't have good medical care, for people who are immigrants to the United States and don't speak English. 50% of the people in our inner city clinic are Latinos from the Caribbean rim, and from sort of northern South America.
That's very interesting, John. How you managed to handle that with the money you get from this people, you can handle the other that don't have money, and you can help them too.
Exactly.
So it's
what we call
very nice.
The Robin Hood principle.
The Robin Hood principle.
Yes, right. So we take the money from the people who have the money, who can afford it, and then we create this clinic for people who have nothing. And we do it for free. And we have free transportation, so there's no excuse not to come, because we send taxis to their homes and bring them. And we also encourage them to bring their little children if they're not in school. And we have mindful daycare right there on site while they're in the classes. So, and in this way, it's very rare for poor people in the United States to experience these kinds of medical alternatives. But we've set it up with some foundation support and from other ways in which we get the money, like the kind I told you, to be able to offer this for people who otherwise would have nothing. And they are, of course, experiencing the most stress of anybody in this society because they're at the bottom of the ladder. In fact, you might say they're not even on the ladder. And their lives improve tremendously through doing this for the most part. And it helps them to enter into the society in a better way as well. We also spent years working in the prisons.
Yes, I've read.
So the point is that mindfulness is really universal. It's not Buddhist. It's not about any religion at all. It's about what is deepest and best about being human. And that is always elicited by paying attention, by cultivating awareness, by cultivating the gardens that Machado was talking about.
Which are the main themes you teach people in prison? Because it must be surely very difficult to access to those people in that stressful situation and isolated.
Well, prison is one of the most hostile environments on earth. And in the study that we did of the effects of teaching in the prisons, we found that we reduced the level of hostility in the inmates. And that's extraordinary, given that hostility is kind of like, the water in which they all swim. But what we emphasize in the prison is learning how to be free in the interior world. So that even if you're in prison, you can be free.
Inside.
And many people are more imprisoned on the outside of the prison by their lives and their own greed and anger and so forth than people in prison. So we emphasize that while you're in prison, and some people are in, of course, for life, but while you're in prison, to make the most of your life, make the most of your moments. In English, we speak of being in prison as doing time.
Doing time.
Doing time. People say, I'm doing time, like I'm doing 20 years. So let's make the most of it, like turn it into a positive experience. So one of the most important things that we emphasize is learning how to control your impulses. Because many people wound up in prison through drugs, for instance. 90% of the people are there for one reason or another, directly or indirectly, because of drugs. So drugs warp the mind, they warp perception, they'll make you do things you would never do otherwise. So we're trying to teach people how to come into a deep element of themselves so that they won't be less interested in the drugs, because the interior adventure is more exciting when you don't obscure the mind with other substances. And then how to be so independent yourself that when all your friends want to go and do this crime or to do something, you can stand in your own truth and not be pulled in that direction.
That's a very common thing.
Yeah,
That people move
peer pressure.
Peer pressure.
Peer pressure. So we're really talking about learning impulse control. And how do you learn it? Moment by moment. You see the mind want to grasp for something, and in seeing the mind want to grasp for something, you can let go of it and step back a little bit, because you have wisdom, you have some discernment, and you have enough self-compassion to realize, and a compassion for other people to realize, when your actions come out of violence, when your actions come out of hatred, you just create more violence and hatred and suffering in the world, and it's going to always come back to you, whether you get caught or not. So teaching in the prisons is not very different from teaching in the outer world, because we all are dealing with the same issues.
Yes, but perhaps they have more, the problems are more strong, no? For example, how the problem with time, that they know they'll be all their lives. How do they handle the time problem?
Well, you can have so much time on your hands that you just stay busy, So they do a lot of weightlifting and a lot of watching television to kill time. We talk about killing time.
Killing time, yeah.
I don't know if that's true in Spanish, but in English we say,
same.
I'm going to kill time.
Matar el tiempo.
Who would want to kill time? Who would want to kill time? So we teach them to use their time. When you're in the present moment, there's nothing but time. There's no time at all. Noticing how you can follow the sound of the bells into yourself, into the silence that follows after the ringing. And the sound of the bells becomes in some way the sound of the world. And the sound of the world is held within the larger silence of the world that's in between the sounds and underneath the sounds. And if we come to the breath through the sound, dropping into our own breath, following the breath, riding the waves of our own breathing. we can get more in touch with the stillness that lies underneath our own agitated, thinking, driven minds and bodies. And then dwell in that stillness and experience revitalization. Every in-breath becomes breathing in fresh life. Every out-breath becomes a new letting go. Every moment becomes this moment, a new beginning, a new opportunity to live our lives as if it really mattered, and as if every moment was miraculous, was pregnant with possibilities that we can be in touch with, that we can be attentive to. The great American writer Henry David Thoreau spoke about the bloom of the present moment in Walden. He spoke a lot about how wonderful it is to simplify one's life, one's way of seeing enough so that one could actually see what was in front of our eyes, could hear what there is to be heard, can touch and be in touch with the texture of the world. And a lot of the time we are completely insensitive to that domain. And it has consequences for the quality of our lives, for the quality of our relationships, and for the meaning in our lives as well. So this is a way to get back in touch with ourselves. It's a very simple, very practical. Anybody can do it. And people, the most common question people ask about it is, well, am I doing it right? If I felt this, is that what I'm supposed to be feeling? What am I supposed to be feeling when I'm quiet, when I'm still, when I'm just listening? And the answer is, whatever you're feeling, that's what you're feeling. Whatever you're experiencing, that's what you're experiencing. We're not trying to change it. We're not trying to fix it. We're simply trying to embrace it in awareness without judging it. So that if you're feeling upset or irritated or bored, no problem. That's what you're feeling in this moment. If you want to call it good or bad, then you're in trouble because you'll start judging. But as long as it's okay to just be with this experience, then you're at home. And being at home feels very comfortable, much less stressful, much less driven. And that will change the next moment. Because if you're comfortable in this moment, it has a big effect on the next moment. So really, the only way we can change the future in any way is by attending to the moment that is now. Many people want to change their future, always planning and worrying about what's going to happen. But if you really want the future to be better, then the way to do that is to take care of this moment. Because this moment is the future. It was the last moment's future. So as long as we're caught up in always running after what we don't have and pushing away what we don't want, we really are slaves to those kinds of energies of grasping and clinging. And really it all comes ultimately out of fear. Out of fear that if I just were to be still, if I were to be simple in this moment, if I were to be my whole self without having to change or do anything else, it wouldn't be enough. But maybe it is enough. Maybe it is just perfect. And maybe what needs to be learned is not so mysterious after all, but it's more like a coming home to oneself.
It's interesting. And the concept of if you work well this moment, you'll be better the next one. No?
Exactly.
That would help people too.
Yeah. To live this moment fully is to really be alive. And of course, that attitude and the embodiment of that completely changes the next moment.
And the concept, sorry, John, of fear you were talking just now too.
Yes.
That's very. How do people? Because fear, it's a very, how do you say, you cannot work it rationally.
Yes, you can't work with your emotions rationally.
No, it just works out. How do you handle people that have fear or?
Well, the funny thing is that we encourage them to watch their fear.
Claro. Not fight
without reacting, not fighting, not trying to make it go away, not trying to fix it. It turns out that's a hugely powerful way to heal oneself. And so when you watch your fear and you live inside it, and you notice that there are a lot of thoughts that go on in the emotion of fear. So there's the feeling in the body, which is very often tense and like that. But there's also thoughts in the mind like, oh my God, this is horrible. I'm never going to get out of it. This is going to last forever. It's going to affect everything in my life. All of those are thoughts. They're very inaccurate thoughts. But we don't think they're thoughts. We think it's the truth. So it just makes it worse and worse and worse, and we get into a vicious cycle. As soon as you notice that those kinds of thoughts are inflammatory, they inflame the situation, they compound the anxiety, then you can...
like a spiral, like you said, you go downwards.
Exactly.
That's very important, how to get out of that.
Yeah, well, as soon as you see that your thoughts are feeding that spiral, you can step back and just watch them as thoughts that appear and disappear in the field of the mind. Again, the image of the clouds coming and going in the sky. If you see yourself as the sky and not as the little storm of fear, then the sky can hold the fear thought and it doesn't produce more fear. So it short circuits the fear, and you can feel much more in touch with greater equilibrium, a greater sense of balance, and the storm goes away, and then it's okay. So we teach people how to ride out the waves of their own emotional storms without unnecessarily feeding them. There's a tremendous amount to be learned from that, and what you learn usually is you're not your fear. You're not your pain.
Yes.
You're much larger than that. So then that provides elements of freedom right then and there. The learning isn't head learning. It's like you've eaten it. You've digested it. It's become part of you, so you know it in a way that no one can take away from you. It's not theoretical knowledge. And then the next time you're in a frightening situation, many situations are very, very frightening. So it's not like fear is bad, or even being terrified is bad, or being angry is bad. Many appropriate situations in which to be angry. How you use that energy makes a huge difference, though, in whether it eats away at you on the inside, as fear can do, or as anger can do, or as depression can do, or whether you can use these energies to grow by working against the energy itself, but not against, but by working with the energy itself, almost as if you were working with weights or with rubber bands that, have some tension, and you stretch against them and your body grows. In the same way, we're cultivating flexibility and strength and balance of mind. It's like an inner yoga, and you use your emotions as kind of opportunities to stretch yourself and to grow. That actually taps into a dimension that's called emotional intelligence. And for instance, if you want your children to learn how to be more emotionally intentional, more emotionally intelligent, it's not a bad idea for you to embody it yourself, because they learn more from the way we are than from what we say.
Yes.
It turns out that we've done some brain studies that actually show that when people go through our 8-week program, that there's a particular area of the brain that is stimulated through the meditation practice.
Very interesting.
And it's called the left prefrontal cortical area. It's this region over here of the cerebral cortex on the left side, and that is associated with positive emotions and happiness, and with effectively responding to negative emotions when you're under severe stress.
Very interesting.
So we randomize people between two conditions. One is they get the 8-week program. This is at work, by the way, not in the hospital. We did it in a bioengineering company in the United States. People agreed to come into a laboratory and be wired up to do electroencephalography, and cardiography,
like
and
biofeedback machine.
lots of different, more sophisticated than biofeedback. And we would stress them while wired up. And they came 3 times, before they took the 8-week program, after they took the 8-week program, and 4 months after they finished the 8-week program. So it's very stressful to go into the laboratory, but these people volunteered to do it. Some of them got the 8-week program first, but everybody had to come into the laboratory. And then the other group got the 8-week program when the whole study was over. And what we found was that the meditators had a stronger stimulation of the left prefrontal cortical area that is indicative of handling negative emotions more effectively under stress. And the non-meditators did not show that. Then we also gave everybody an injection, a vaccination with the influenza vaccine at the end of the 8 weeks, both the control group and the experimental group. And then we measured their antibodies to the flu vaccine at 5 weeks later and at 9 weeks later. And what we found was that the meditation group showed a much stronger antibody response than the non-meditators.
So interesting.
So the immune system was stimulated, and also this part of the brain. And then when we plotted the brain change versus the immune change, what we find is that there's a linear relationship. The people that showed the strongest changes in the brain, in the left prefrontal cortical area, showed the strongest antibody responses to the flu vaccine.
So they have a
So there's some
immune
relationship.
system.
There's a relationship between the nervous system in the meditators and the immune system that is leading to a stronger, more robust immune response. It's only one study. We are, but we're very excited about this. I did this in collaboration with Dr. Richard Davidson at the University of Wisconsin Medical School and the Laboratory of Affective Neuroscience, which he directs. And we will be doing other studies to look more deeply into these kinds of relationships. But it's an indication that learning how to bring mindfulness into one's life, according to the methodologies that we've developed in what we call mindfulness-based stress reduction, can actually lead to differences in the brain that have to do with perception and the filtering of emotions under stressful situations. So that we have choices. We can either, react with rage or terror or, in situations, or we can feel the rage and terror if it's appropriate, but work with them differently, more emotionally intelligently.
That we can handle the fear, not the fear handle ourselves.
Beautifully. That's a beautiful way to put it. That we can handle the fear rather than being at the complete mercy of the fear or of our other emotions.
Yes.
And that in the consequence of that, guess what? Our immune system is healthier. So under stress, the immune system tends to go down, and so you're more likely to get colds, upper respiratory tract infections, or for that matter, be more susceptible to various kinds of physiological imbalance. And if meditation can actually reestablish that balance, bring us back into right inward measure, as we were speaking about, then that in itself is a profound reason for maybe spending a little time every day tuning your instrument before you play in the orchestra. Every orchestra, takes 10, 15 minutes. They tune the instruments. They don't just start the show.
No.
They tune the instruments first. This is a remarkable instrument. We need to learn how to tune it. When we're born, of course, it doesn't come with an instruction manual.
No.
How to tune the baby, how to tune your body. So it takes us 30 or 40 years to learn how to do that. The parents, if they don't have any idea, then they don't know how to help the baby to learn that. The babies actually know a lot about it themselves, but bit by bit, I think it's squeezed out of them because it's discouraged. So they are put on the fast track, and they wind up stressed and impatient and hurrying to get to the university or to get a great job or whatever. And childhood is becoming lost in some ways. Another study that we did, which speaks to other aspects of the power of mindfulness, is a study that looked at the question, can we show that the mind can influence a healing process?
Interesting.
And not just any healing process, but I wanted a healing process that we could see with our eyes and photograph, so that we didn't need PET scans or
something tangible.
Exactly, something tangible. So we thought, well, why don't we take a skin disease? Because then we can look at the skin. And there are many skin diseases that are made worse by stress. Psoriasis was the one that we chose. Psoriasis is a disease that the origins of it are fairly obscure. We don't really understand everything about it. There are certain genes that are important in psoriasis that have to do with cell proliferation and the control of the cell replication cycle. So psoriasis is an uncontrolled cell proliferation in the epidermis, but it's not cancer, interestingly enough. The cells grow and they form these very scaly patches that are unsightly and itchy, and it can cover your whole body. But your skin can also be clear at different times. So the skin has the capacity to be normal, but it also has the capacity to like lose its normality and become covered with these scaly patches. And stress stimulates psoriasis flare-ups a lot. Okay, and everybody knows that their psoriasis gets worse when they're under stress, either physical stress or emotional stress. So what we decided to do was to take people who are receiving treatment for psoriasis, and the treatment for it is ultraviolet light, like sunlight. So people come to the hospital 3 times a week, and they get what's called phototherapy, where they stand naked in a light box. It's like a telephone booth, but a round one with floor-to-ceiling lights with ultraviolet light. They protect their corneas. Their eyes are covered, and usually the whole head is covered because the ultraviolet could ruin the corneas in the eyes. And then they stand in the light box. The lights come on. They're very hot. They're very powerful. And so they come 3 times a week, and you have to start with very short periods of exposure, and then it grows with time up to about 10 or 15 minutes. So they're standing in the light box with a pillowcase usually over their head, motors blowing air, whirring noises, and so forth. Very unpleasant, stressful. And so we were asked, could we reduce their stress by teaching them some meditation while they're in the light booth? And we said, well, we'll do better than that. Why don't we do a study where we randomize people between 2 groups? One, they just get the light by itself, and just the regular treatment. The other, while they're standing there, we'll make a guided meditation tape. We'll put speakers on top of the booth. When the lights come on, we play the tape, and the person will hear a guided instructions for meditation. And we'll see if the meditators heal at the same rate as the non-meditators. And just for fun, we threw in a visualization. As the tape got longer and the light treatments get longer, they hear more and more of the tape. And we decided we would throw in a visualization where they are visualizing the light slowing down the rapidly growing cells in the epidermis. So they're just intending for the light to do its work, and they're helping, they're participating. I'm concentrating, focusing on the mind, helping the light to do its work of healing. What we found when we photographed the patients and in a very careful way measured the progress of their psoriasis over time, the light treatment is so powerful that if the people stay in the treatment, everybody eventually heals. It's not a cure, but their skin clears, but it comes back again. So it's not a cure. But if the people stay in the with the treatments long enough, pretty much everybody's skin clears. But the meditators were their skin was clearing at 4 times the rate of the non-meditators. 4 times the rate of the non-meditators.